Who wants more creativity? Well, you do, obviously. That's why you clicked on this video. Obviously, I'm not in my usual lair. I'm actually traveling in Egypt. Actually, it's my last day in Egypt. And if you look back there, you can actually see the Great Pyramid of Giza. Yes, that is what that is back there. But Egypt is not the topic of this video, but it actually is going to play a part in what I'm going to talk about. But before we get into the topic, if you find yourself liking this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel by hitting that subscribe button right down here and clicking the bell so you'll be notified when I put new videos out. If you're not feeling like you're very creative, if you're not feeling like you're creative enough, or that you're blocked, or that in general you're just not a creative person and you would like to be, let's first take a look at what you define as creative. Most people have a very high standard of what that word means when they think of being creative, especially if they don't feel that way. They know someone who paints really well, who draws really well, and they say, wow, that person's a creative person. Or they think of very famous creative people like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. And so they have this very, very high standard of what it means to be creative. And so in NLP, we call this scope. It is how you define creativity. It's what you internally represent that gives you this category, creativity. And if that scope is very narrow, it's going to be very limited. You're going to have a very specific idea of how you define creativity, and this usually doesn't serve us. It can serve us in some cases if we need to be very specific about something, but if we're not feeling creative and we don't identify as being creative, a lot of times it's because we have such a narrow scope of that definition, and it's preventing us from being creative because we just don't think of ourselves that way. Or we might feel blocked and we say, okay, well, right now I am not creative. And the reason that is because I've been creative before, and what I'm experiencing now doesn't feel like that. And so a lot of times we can start to narrow that scope of that definition and sort of have a hardened definition of what it means to be creative. And this usually does not serve us. Like I said, we want to have a freer definition about what it means to be creative. And even the word itself, or the meaning itself, the word creativity is an indication of things that are more inclusive and more wide open. So if we have a very narrow definition of it, it kind of is counter to what creativity actually is, which is a lot of inclusion, a lot of freedom, a lot of openness, a lot of not so well-defined ideas, more like open to ideas and open to the cultivation of ideas. So when we start to narrow that idea about what creativity is, we're really working against our own creativity. Now, another thing that can happen to us is we have our daily routine, whether you think of your life as routine, or that you have a morning routine or an afternoon routine or an evening routine. Regardless if you think of it that way, you actually do. If you stop to think about what you do typically every day, Monday through Friday. Saturday and Sunday could be a little bit different because it's the weekend, but you typically also have a Saturday routine and a Sunday routine. Now again, you might not have consciously put together a routine and thought it through, but we are creatures of habit, and you will see that we have patterns that we repeat over and over again. And part of this is just to make life more familiar, make it feel safer. It's also easier. We don't have to make as many decisions, and your mind is always trying to find ways to be more efficient with your time and your energy. And so if we can put things on autopilot, then we can think about other things. But typically what we do is we put things on autopilot and we don't think about other things. We don't challenge our minds to think about things that will possibly move us out of that comfort of those patterns. So we want to become a little more conscious of our patterns, and then ask ourselves, how can we step out of those patterns? Those patterns become invisible. Like I said, most people don't think of their lives as being routine or having specific routines, but they do. And why do they not think of them consciously this way? Is because your patterns after a while become invisible to you. It's like a fish doesn't even know it's in water. The water, in a sense, is invisible to it because it's always been there. So your patterns become invisible to you. And so when they start to limit you, you won't even know exactly what is limiting you because the pattern itself is invisible. So how do we smoke this out? How do we call attention to it? How do we make these invisible patterns visible again so that we can step out of them? Well, one thing I love doing is travel. And I try to travel every few months, even if it's just to take a road trip outside of the town that I live in, because it is a way of stepping out of those patterns, stepping out of my routine. And this is actually one of the reasons why people don't travel. I hear people all the time saying, I'd love to travel, but I can't afford it. I'd love to travel, but I don't have the time. And almost every time someone tells me that, I start asking them questions. And it turns out, no, they have the money to do it, because actually travel is the least expensive it's ever been. You can buy a plane ticket to many other countries that doesn't cost much. It used to cost a lot more to fly. Now it's actually very cheap. And then if you schedule the time, almost all of us has paid vacation time. If you schedule the time, you can make the time. You can make the time for anything. You might have to push something else out, and you might have to prioritize and make it happen. But again, almost always when I talk to someone about travel and they say they don't have the time and the money, it's almost always not true. What they don't have is they don't have I would say what they're afraid of is they're afraid of stepping outside the comfort of those patterns. Again, they don't even know what the patterns are because they've become invisible. But to step outside of it and break that comfort level is extremely scary to a lot of people. It feels like some unknown that they're afraid to step into. And so I found that most people who don't travel, who say they want to, it's really that keeps them from traveling. It's that limiting patterns, those limiting patterns that they're so afraid to step out of because they've grown so comfortable with them. Well, this is also what would stifle creativity. And when you step out of that pattern, you'll notice there might be a little discomfort at first, but once that settles down, you'll notice you'll tend to get a lot of creativity that will flow after that. I feel incredibly creative when I travel. And I was noticing this before I even was shooting video and writing a lot. And I got to the point where I was like, wow, I think I need to sit down with a notebook and just write while I travel, because I could feel like all this creativity gushing out of me. I now shoot a lot of video, and I now work and travel at the same time. And so I have most of my most creative moments are when I'm traveling. So I make sure that I capture that. Travel is one of the reasons why I travel is to become more creative, to access that creativity. And I always have my cameras with me, and I always have my notebooks to write all of this down. So if you want to become more creative, find a way to step outside of that pattern. Now, travel is not the only way to necessarily do that, but I found it to be an incredibly good way and in a very enjoyable way to do that. I love travel even before I was creating anything. So take something that you really enjoy and find a way to use that to step outside of these patterns, because yes, it is a little uncomfortable to step outside of your comfort zone, to step outside of your normal routines, the town you live in, all the stuff that's very familiar to you and that you know very well. But if you enjoy travel, that's a greater incentive to do it. Step outside of those patterns and you will access a lot more creativity because you're not held back by those stifling patterns anymore. The other thing that you can do that I find very, very simple and that I do periodically is I go to a museum, especially an art museum, a modern art museum or contemporary art museum. I live in Santa Cruz, so the Modern Museum of Art in San Francisco is about a little more than an hour's drive from me. And so you might not have a museum right in your hometown, but there's typically going to be a place that's nearby that you can go where you can see art. And it doesn't have to be like paintings or sculptures. Even watching a great film, a very artistic, independent film, often does it for me as well, or reading a very creative book. So there are ways to become more creative by feeding off the creativity of others. And I find museums are a great way to do that. Overall, just think about what inspires creativity in you. Think about the people who you admire who are very creative and spend some time with their work. I love reading Henry Miller. When I read Henry Miller, I feel like writing. Whenever I want to be more creative with my videos, I'll go watch videos from Casey Neistat. Now, this is not to copy them. You don't want to copy anybody, but they're inspiring. When you think about those people or the works that have inspired creativity in you, and go spend time with that. And don't spend time with it thinking, or comparing yourself, your creativity to their creativity. That will kill your creativity as well. It's no, you go look at this, whatever it is that inspires you, go listen to it, go watch it, and understand what is it about it that really inspires that creativity in you. And then use that inspiration to be creative. Another thing that will help you be more creative is to think of creativity as a value. And you feel it inside of you. If you've clicked on this video, you value creativity. So because you value creativity, think about all the possible ways in which you can fulfill that value within yourself. Anytime you value something and you do something, act in a way or behave in a way that aligns with that value, your self-esteem will go up, your confidence will go up. So if you think about creativity and how you value it, and you think about all the possible ways, even just the smallest behaviors, the simplest acts that would align with that value of creativity that you can do, there's always something you can do right now. There's always a step that you can take right now. It might not be a big step. There's always at least a small step you can take. And so taking action is so important. Even if you just sit down with a notebook and you say, okay, I'm just going to write down whatever ideas come to me. It could be that simple. I think what a lot of people do is they put so much burden on themselves about what it means to be creative. Like I said, the definition of what it means to be creative. If your scope for that is too narrow, it will make it very difficult for you to be creative. So open that scope and then think about creativity is not always about art necessarily. If you can be creative anytime you're creating anything. So if you're in business, creating a business, that is creativity. So make sure that you're opening that scope of the definition of creativity to include anything that you create. It doesn't have to be art. It doesn't have to be admired by others. It's creating anything, creating a family, creating a business, anything that the word create could be applied to. Include that in your definition and you'll feel the ease of this. You'll feel the things easing up. You'll feel that burden that of being creative start to lift. And that's just it. It's like when you're truly being creative, you're not burdened by anything. It's that freedom, it's that joy that just sort of pours out of you, that inspiration, that passion. And you really lock all that stuff out when you narrow your definition of what that means. So explore creativity, explore how you value creativity. Use other people's creativity to inspire you. That's why we love art, and that's why we are inspired by these other people, these other creators, is because there's something about their work that touches you. So get in touch with that and use that to motivate you to go forward. If you want to take this deeper and you want to explore not only the value of creativity, but your other values, the ways in which you value anything that you want to do in life, in the description right here down below, there's a link. Click that link and you'll get access to how to do a value solicitation. Most important things I ever learned in NLP, and probably one of the most overlooked things that is taught in NLP. And I use this in my life all the time. I do value solicitations about every few months. They just help me get clear about what it is that I want, what it is that I value, what motivates me, what inspires me. And so it's really, really important to do value solicitations. And some people say, well, yeah, I learned that in NLP. I did that one time. I don't need to do it anymore. No, this is a practice. This is something you should be doing. You should be doing a value solicitation for every area of your life and really connecting with those values. Your values are motivation. People say, well, I need motivation. I don't know how to get motivated. It's because you have this idea about motivation, just kind of like creativity, this idea about what it is. And it's like, no, motivation is when you are clear about what it is you value. Then you don't need to try to get motivation. That is motivation itself. Just like when you're acting creative, when you're doing things that you define as creative, then you feel creative. That's how it works. When you do things that make you happy, and happiness is a tremendous value. When you do things that make you happy, then you're happy. It's not like happiness sort of comes and goes and that you have to catch it and try to hold on to it. A lot of people try that, it doesn't work. Happiness, creativity, all of these things are active things. You have to understand and be clear about how you value them, and then what it takes, what behaviors it takes to align with those values that then makes you feel that way and it motivates you to be that way. So a value solicitation is one of the most important things you can do in your life. And you can, like I said, access that free PDF by going to the description right down below and clicking on that link. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button. You want to get these videos on a regular basis. And last but not least, if you can think of a friend or a family member who would benefit from a video like this, make sure you share it with them. Take care.